They say borders define the world. But there was a time when borders did not exist. A time when a traveler's greatest danger wasn't distance. It was identity. Long before nations were carved onto maps, before visas, checkpoints, and immigration lines, there was a kingdom that created something the world had never seen. A simple object, made of words, not paper, that allowed ordinary people to walk safely through lands filled with enemies. It was not a weapon. It was not a seal of power. It was permission, the world's first passport. To understand how this happened, we must travel back nearly 2,500 years to a region where kingdoms rose and fell like tides, where horses thundered across desert plains, and where a single empire stretched farther than any before it. The Achaemenid Empire, the ancient Persian kingdom founded by Cyrus the Great, was the first great superpower in human history. At its height, it ruled more than 40% of the world's population, a percentage no empire has ever matched since. But its true genius wasn't conquest. It was administration. Persia wasn't just land and armies. It was a system engineered to connect Egypt to India, Turkey to Iraq, Babylon to Central Asia. The empire's greatest invention wasn't the chariot or the bow. It was the royal road, a 2,700-kilometer highway that redefined how nations communicated. Along this road, messengers traveled faster than any cross-continental travelers in ancient history. Caravanserais offered safety, food, and shelter. Guard posts patrolled the routes. Trade flowed through markets alive with languages from every corner of the empire. But with great connectivity came a unique problem. Anyone could travel, even those who shouldn't. Persia needed a solution, a way to identify who was allowed to pass through checkpoints and who wasn't. And so began one of the most overlooked revolutions in human history. The earliest form of a passport wasn't a booklet. It was a written letter of safe conduct, issued by the king himself. It granted the bearer a protected journey through dangerous lands. This document, recorded by the Greek historian Xenophon, allowed travelers to move safely across the empire, no matter their origin or destination. Merchants carried it. Diplomats carried it. Even ordinary citizens needing to cross provincial borders depended on it. For the first time, a traveler wasn't defined by where they were, but by what they carried. This was the dawn of identity-based mobility. The system expanded. Provincial governors issued local travel documents. Couriers for the Royal Mail carried official tablets stamped with the king's seal. Diplomatic envoys presented engraved metal plaques that functioned like elite passports. In a world where most people never traveled more than 50 kilometers from home, Persia engineered mobility on a continental scale. Yet this breakthrough wasn't just administrative genius. It was political strategy. Every empire struggles with the same contradiction. To rule a vast land, you must allow people to move. But when people move, they challenge control. Persia solved this by creating trusted mobility. If you held the king's document, you weren't dangerous. You were recognized. You were allowed. This balance between control and freedom became the backbone of their stability. But history has a habit of repeating its lessons. As time passed, Persia faced new threats. Greeks in the west, nomadic tribes in the east, internal rebellions in the center. And with each challenge, the security of travel became more important and more difficult. The passport evolved. Documents became more detailed. Permissions became more restrictive. Movement became more political. It was a cycle the world would repeat for centuries. The Roman Empire built its own version of travel permits. Medieval Islamic kingdoms introduced written travel letters for scholars and merchants. China's Tang dynasty created household registration documents that doubled as internal passports. But none of these systems existed without the blueprint first designed in Persian soil. The idea that identity must be verified before movement is allowed. Today, the passport feels inevitable, permanent, unquestionable. But its origins reveal the truth. Passports exist because power needs structure. Borders aren't natural. They're engineered. Passports aren't ancient. They're strategic. And the first kingdom to understand this reshaped global mobility forever. Because the invention of the passport wasn't about travel. It was about control, trust, and the relationship between people and the state. And that raises a final question. In a world where borders are tightening and identity is everything, are we still living inside the same system the Persians created? Or is the passport itself becoming the next relic of fading empires? But the story doesn't end with Persia's brilliance. Because the passport, like every invention of power, would evolve into something far more complex than the people of the ancient world could imagine. As the Achaemenid Empire rose, the world watched in awe. But when it fell, the passport survived. When Alexander conquered Persia, he did not destroy its administrative systems. He absorbed them. His generals relied on the same travel permissions, the same network of checkpoints, the same authentication rules to maintain control over distant lands. It was the first sign of a pattern that would continue for thousands of years. Empires fall. Systems live on. Centuries later, Rome adopted its own methods for identifying citizens and controlling travel. Travel permits were issued to soldiers, tax collectors, diplomats, and merchants. In a world where Roman roads stretched across continents, control became as important as connectivity. The passport kept evolving. By the medieval era, Islamic caliphates introduced bar documents, written proofs of identity and tax payment that allowed safe passage across regions. Traders, traveling along the Silk Road, carried letters from rulers ensuring they weren't mistaken for spies or smugglers. Chinese dynasties recorded every family, every movement, every migration in vast household registration systems, perhaps the most sophisticated internal passport network in ancient history. Yet these systems shared a single ancestor, Persia's idea that authority must travel with the traveler. But something unexpected happened when Europe entered the Middle Ages. Kingdoms fragmented, travel was dangerous, roads decayed, and the passport, once a symbol of connection, became a tool of restriction. Kings issued travel letters not to grant freedom, but to deny it. Movement became a privilege reserved for nobles and diplomats. For ordinary people, staying put was safer and often required. It wasn't until the rise of global trade and exploration that passports resurfaced as essential. The British Empire issued documents for merchants sailing across oceans. France introduced more standardized passports after the Revolution. Japan adopted European-style passports in the 19th century as it opened to the world. The Ottoman Empire modernized travel permits to manage a diverse population spanning 3 continents. But the true transformation came in the 20th century. World War I changed everything. Movement became a security threat. Borders hardened. Nations realized that identity must be controlled, standardized, verified. In 1920, the League of Nations introduced one of the first modern passport standards: photographs, descriptions, official seals. This was the moment the world fully embraced a system Persia had created 2,500 years earlier. The passport became global. But with global acceptance came global inequality. Some passports opened borders. Others locked their citizens inside. Some granted privilege. Others imposed suspicion. A document that once symbolized safe passage now symbolized geopolitical hierarchy. And as international systems evolved, a strange irony emerged. The more globalized the world became, the more valuable borders became. The passport, once designed to protect travelers, became the gatekeeper of opportunity. It determined where you could work, study, invest, or even escape in times of crisis. It became a measurement of status, mobility, and global trust. And so we return to the ancient Persian idea. Identity creates access. Access creates mobility. Mobility creates power. Today, digital identity systems are replacing paper documents. Biometric passports store fingerprints, facial maps, and iris scans. Some nations are exploring fully digital passports. Others are already integrating travel permissions into national ID systems. But the biggest question is not technological, it is philosophical. When Persia invented the first passport, It created a system to make travel safer. Today, the passport determines who belongs and who doesn't. We now live in a world where some people can travel to 180 countries without a visa, while others can barely leave their own. A world where power determines mobility, just as it did 2,500 years ago. And yet, even now, the passport is evolving again. As borders face new pressures, climate migration, geopolitical tensions, digital nomadism, global inequality, nations are rewriting the rules of identity. Some people collect second passports. Some buy citizenship through investment programs. Some rely on refugee travel documents. Some remain stuck because of a passport they never chose. In a world where identity is everything, the passport has become the modern currency of mobility, a direct descendant of Persia's invention. So the question is no longer, which kingdom invented the passport? The question is, what will replace the passport next? Will nations move toward a unified digital identity? Will mobility become a universal right? Or will borders tighten further, making passports more important and more unequal than ever? Only one thing is certain. The idea that a piece of documentation can shape your destiny began in an empire long gone, but its influence is everywhere. Persia invented the passport. The world perfected it. Now humanity must decide what comes after it.